Hi, how are you? I'm so excited you're here.
Hey, Andrea. Really excited to be here too.
Okay, so we're just gonna dive right in. So before we're recording, we were kind of chit-chatting about some things we want to touch on, and I'd love to start with please share just a little bit into what got you to where you are, like how you're practicing and the things that you think are really powerful and helpful for people. I think that that's really important. People's, a little bit of backstory is always really important for people to hear.
Well, like a lot of practitioners, I was drawn into the healing arts and sciences through my own suffering.
Yes.
So I grew up in the repressed Midwest, I
Yes.
guess you could say. And that was really damaging to me because I think at my core, I'm an expressive person. I have a lot of vitality and a lot of energy to express, and getting repressed was very damaging to me. So I had a lot of social anxiety. And when I was in college, I was just a mess. When I got my bachelor's, and I ran into some of the alternative methodologies like acupuncture and psychotherapy. Like I worked at a new age bookstore when I was like 19 or something like that, which was a massive shift. My friends in college were like, what the fuck is up with this guy? Because I was like the party guy. And then all of a sudden I went to a new age bookstore, picked up a yoga book, and it changed my life. It totally changed my life. And I was like 19. This was before like yoga classes were really popular in Wisconsin. You know what I mean? And I was like doing yoga by myself in my room, and the guy at like 4 a.m. and the guys were still up partying at that time. It's going to yoga retreats at that time, in the early 2000s. Um, going from raves to retreats. And then I was a mess, and then I did this kind of sudden shift and had a bit of an awakening, I guess you could say, and then moved out to California. My first job was at a massage school, a residential massage school, which doesn't really happen anymore, way off in the hills. And I had like an aesthetic life, like kind of like a monk's life, where there was teachers from all around the world coming in to teach, healing arts practices, massage technologies and stuff like that. And I started to work with trauma at a really young age, like at about age 20. I was doing body work that was oriented to working with trauma and clearing trauma. And it wasn't until 10, 15 years later that I decided to go get my doctorate. So there's a lot there, like I got introduced into men's work, but in many ways I really started at the margins. You know what I mean? Like, and then I went into the center, into licensure and stuff like that from the margins in. And sometimes it can be opposite, but I think it's kind of an unusual way into being a doctor in psychology.
I would say so. I think a lot of the practitioners who I'm interviewing, who are coming on and who I've come across, it's the opposite, like I have, right? It's like I started with this very conventional and then have moved away from that, right, through my experience. So I think that that's really cool. I'd be curious to hear a little more about all the body work that you were doing specifically to like release and neutralize trauma. And I'm guessing you were working with the nervous system.
For sure. In fact, I'm a bit of a weirdo when it comes to my bodywork professional development as well, because I started out in the kind of energy psychology stuff, like, craniosacral work. I taught craniosacral work for about 8 years internationally. And then I went into deep tissue stuff and like Rolfing, the deepest of the deep, which is, I don't know if you've heard of Rolfing, but structural integration is like the deepest bodywork there is. So I went from the energetic and approaching the body as an energy field and stuff like that to the really concrete and clinical body work. And a lot of times people do the opposite. But in the early days, I had this just amazing mentor. He's the one that founded Heartwood Institute, which is where I lived. And his name is Bruce Berger. And Bruce was an incredible trauma resolution practitioner. In the early days, I took a course called Somatic Emotional Clearing. And so this is where you're working directly with the body. It's kind of in the middle in terms of an energy approach that looks at energy dynamics and an approach that kind of is visceral in the sense that it works directly with the tissues, works directly with perception, the clinician's perception, to be able to read how the body is housing trauma, housing repressed emotion, which was important for me, right? Because I was housing all sorts of repressed emotion.
Yes.
And I remember the first session I ever had with Bruce. He just within 3 minutes, he touched me, and I'm just getting chills thinking about it. Within 3 minutes, he touched me and I was bawling. It was something about his presence, something about his voice, and that repressed well of grief it was something about the space that he held. So he's kind of my hero in that way. He's like a Sherpa, or he just came in and he just saw something. I met several people like that. So I feel like really, really lucky that I was able to do that. And for the next like 15 years, it was about me trying to figure out what these mentors were up to, and then gradually develop a neurological language, because I'm a neuroscience professor now, because I wanted a framework. I wanted to understand how to explain it, to make it available to a lot of people, so that it wasn't just, marginalized kind of mumbo jumbo stuff, that mumbo jumbo talking to people that are already interested in mumbo jumbo talk. Yeah.
I love that. So what are you teaching in the field of neuroscience to your students?
Yeah, so it's a trauma resolution, essentially the latest in neuroscience in terms of what we have, how we understand the ego, the neural correlates to the ego. Like functionally, what I teach is trauma resolution, and like the neuroscience of trauma, which is quite popular out there. But like I'm really at the cutting edge. Like the stuff that's propagating online right now is actually way behind just way behind. Like, for example, Stephen Porges's stuff, polyvagal theory, that stuff is really old, actually.
It is. As a therapist, I was doing my own research when everything was super underground, and that stuff already existed. It was just like it wasn't popular, it wasn't widely accepted, and so you had to really dig, but it was there already.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds so fancy, right? Polyvagal theory. It sounds so
Yeah.
complex, and like it's almost like magical, right? Like, oh, this really complex word, that means that this practitioner knows something really special.
Yeah.
So like, okay, since they're talking this mumbo jumbo, this is the other side, the scientific mumbo jumbo. So you have the kind of psycho-spiritual mumbo jumbo, and then you have the scientific mumbo jumbo. And the shadow side of both sides is like the shadow of arrogance, which I got in my 20s. I was fully taken by that shadow. You know what I mean? And I became kind of arrogant, kind of like this arrogant yoga teacher guy with like the yoga voice, the yoga voice. You know what I'm talking about? Like the voice, like
Yeah.
I'm so spiritual by how I talk.
Yeah, like just feeling like in a superiority in a way. Absolutely. I to sure are too. Like I've done a lot of work. I'm ahead. I'm ahead of, the collective, if you will.
Yeah, and when I got into therapy speak and learning how to do therapy speak, I fell prey to a similar dynamic where it's like, oh, you're projecting on me. I had the lingo, the phrase, and I still do. Of course, I'm not perfect. I'm a human. I have my frailties and my imperfections, right? So there'll be moments where I still use therapy speak in a way that I'm not impressed by myself.
Totally. Totally. Okay, can you share a little bit about some of the most current research, information, insights with the neuroscience of trauma?
So in my book, I go fully into the cerebellum. So the
Okay.
cerebellum is at the back of the head. It's an ultra dense area of neurons, and it's what's called a subcortical structure. So a lot of the focus in modern neuroscience is the focus on the frontal cortex. Okay, the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex has a lot to do with self-regulation, which is a buzzword out there. We can talk more about self-regulation and the kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of talking about self-regulation. But there's been a lot of hyper focus on this area in the front being the pinnacle of evolution and like the exemplar of how human brains are more evolved than other like old world monkeys and primates and so on, like our cousins. So there's like a hyper focus on what, And a technical term is called the orbitofrontal cortex. And that's considered like the apex or the top of the limbic system and like the seat of self-regulation, so that when that area is online and wired up to the core of the brain, we can then self-regulate, self-soothe. When we're getting angry or getting really anxious, this area can light up and sort of self-soothe from the top down. It's called top-down regulation. Okay. So the cerebellum is an underrepresented area. Okay. It's subcortical. Now, subcortical means that it's underneath the cortex. Okay. And these structures are traditionally thought of as being more primitive.
Yeah.
Okay. Like we share, like there's, the cerebellum is like something like 600 million years old. And there's like a kind of proto-cerebellum in like eels. You know what I mean? So it was like old. But the human cerebellum is like at some period of time in our evolution, human brain evolution, the cerebellum just like mutated and is now like just crazy complex.
Interesting.
And it does things that we never thought it did 20, 30 years ago. For many, many years, it was thought that the cerebellum does just, like refined motor movements, like muscular movements, and it sort of tweaks and refines and edits motor sequences. Like, for example, our gait while we're walking. The cerebellum is doing a lot of that sort of patterned stuff, but also really complex stuff. Like if you trip over a log, how the gait corrects.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So like looking at you nodding, it's doing a lot of mirroring function. This is more like the latest. We're kind of segueing into the latest research with the cerebellum. It's doing a lot of mirroring stuff. Like you're nodding and my cerebellum is mapping how your body is moving.
Interesting.
Yep. And so now the latest research is that it does all sorts of social higher order stuff that people only thought that the prefrontal cortex did. And so this is amazing. This is like people are really starting to understand how integrated the brain is and how the cerebellum as an ancient structure is so vital to higher order cognitive processes. Like mirroring, empathy, narrativization, like telling stories and stuff like that. And what I'm really excited about and what I go into at length in the book, is that the cerebellum is part of the default mode network.
Okay.
Now, have you heard of the default mode network?
No.
Okay. So the default mode network is the pivot point from the older model of neuroscience to what's now becoming more and more in vogue. It's called the network neuroscience paradigm. So for a long time, the brain was just thought of, there's areas like Broca's area, that organizes how we talk. My Broca's area is lit up. Your Wernicke's area is lit up because you're listening. I'm talking. Broca's area, kind of like this area of the brain does this, and that area of the brain does that. But now with the network neuroscience paradigm, there's this shift into the brain is a distributed network. So that what you have then is you have a whole network of nodes like Broca's and Wernicke's, speaking and listening, that is an integrated network. I mean, and the whole thing kind of channels into mega networks. So you take information on the sides of the brain, at the periphery and stuff like that does functions like listening and, the senses and stuff like that. And it channels it into a memory superhighway. And that's the default mode network. The default mode network is a memory superhighway. Okay. So when we're sleeping, the hippocampi light up. And what are they doing? They're cherry picking memories from the day, things that were important during the day, and essentially uploading that memory information into the memory superhighway, which is the default mode network. So default mode network is our best contender in neuroscience, modern neuroscience, for what the ego is.
Okay.
Self-referential thinking, how the mind worries about stuff in the past, projects stuff into the future. Yeah. And then the cerebellum, and I had to do the deep dive into the research for this, the cerebellum as a subcortical structure is part of the default mode network, which is weird. Because what does that mean? That means that how we make gestures, how our body, before we're even conscious of like what we're tracking or seeing or the meaning making process, the cerebellum and the default mode network is already making meaning before we're conscious of it. So like you looking up and off to the right just now,
Yeah.
My cerebellum is already making meaning, going through a library of other times that people did that and making meaning of it. And that could be the good, the bad, and the ugly. So if you look up and to the right, I could be already in a process of like freaking out because somebody did that, when I was 4 or 9 or something like that. And it's like this catalog of sequences. It does sequencing the cerebellum, like so sequenced hand movements. But it also, of course, is going to be tracking the sequence of events, traumatic events. You know what I mean? And so if that doesn't get processed, then the feed forward elements of the default mode network. So what I mean by feed forward is that in the network neuroscience paradigm, the brain does what's called predictive simulation, the core function. So like I see those eyes move and my brain is like stimulating a future based on that cue. And it's constantly doing that. It's doing it really fast. It would trip over a log. It's predictively simulating how the feet are going to land.
A lot of anticipatory processing.
Big time.
Sounds like.
Big time. So if we get in a car accident, a bad car accident, there's a sequence of happenings so the car comes from a very precise geometry. You know what I mean? It doesn't come from all over the place. The car comes from exactly there. You know what I mean? And when the car hits, the cerebellum and the brain is trying to simulate a pathway towards survival.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it has to do it really, really fast. And if a person is, for example, trapped in the car or something like that, the brain is still trying to find a pathway towards survival, but it's thwarted. It can't do it. So there's like a sequence of motor movements and things that the body wants to do and needs to do to get to safety, and it can't do it. Same thing with abuse. The body is pinned down, and what is it doing? It's looking for ways out, but it's thwarted it. It can't do it. So a lot of times what I'm doing in trauma resolution work is I'm helping to I'm kind of talking to the brain, like, what did you want to do? And the body, of course, what did you want to do, but you couldn't do? And I'm talking directly to the cerebellum because I'm looking for the sequence that the motor system wants to do to get out of there that couldn't. And I'm trying to release it. And then the results are just extraordinary, right? It's extraordinary.
Okay, so I have so many questions. I'd be curious to know then, like, let's talk about trauma for a second and people who have flashbacks and or just replay scenarios, right? That makes me wonder now if it's not just what we thought it was, if it's like we're replaying to try to move through or move past or whatever you want to however you want to categorize it, the traumatic event versus it's just like, oh, we are reliving it. It's more like, but it's like we're reliving it to try to move through it is kind of what something I got from that.
Well, that's the positive good side of it, that there's a fixed and repeating action pattern. But the bad news is that the fixed and repeating action pattern becomes a habit by itself. And this is why intervention is needed and somebody with a lot of experience is needed and this is where Freud was right.
Okay.
He had this term called repetition compulsion. The compulsion to repeat, even if it's bad stuff. And this shows up in couples therapy a lot, right? Yeah. So couples will show up and they'll be like, okay, we want to get better. We want to get better as a couple. But then over like several sessions, many sessions, you start to see that, whoa, they are sabotaging themselves.
Patterns.
Whoa. The patterns that they're here to change, they are committed to sustaining them, even though, and this is their subconscious, right? They're not consciously, and it just, the compulsion to repeat fixed and repeating action patterns. And so I guess all that is to say that yes, it is an opportunity to change each time the wheel turns. But there's also, it's really important to understand this is not easy.
Yeah.
There are forces that want to keep the wheel turning, even if your conscious mind up here says, okay, I'm here to change. Like I like to say, my joke is, hey, healing is great, but we need to understand that we're allergic to healing.
I mean, it's true because you can't just will your way to a new pattern. You really can't. You can't white knuckle it. You can't just, I mean, there's some conscious stuff you can change, but it really, I mean, the most tremendous, incredible transformations I've ever had have been through doing very deep work and having very significant interventions that I know have like cleared, neutralized things and rewired things, and you know what I mean? And I'm somebody with a lot of willpower. So I think this is so important. This is something I share a lot in my messaging is like, you know, you can't talk your way out of a trauma pattern, something that's really deeply integrated into your nervous system and your brain. Like you just can't talk your way out of it, right? Talking only gets you so far.
Yeah. Somatic work is very powerful, and there's also, as there is in, I believe, every ideological system, there's a shadow, there's a dark side. You know what I mean? So like, I think there's a instinct to make meaning in the human. I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? We're meaning making machines.
Absolutely.
And like, I think there's an urge to make meaning of our suffering because we all suffer.
Yeah.
And modern trauma discourse, I see that there's like this dark side that like people want to now on some level just kind of explain all of our suffering away in terms of trauma.
Right.
Because it's like we got to have an explanation for this suffering. And sometimes there's a clear link, and otherwise this discourse, this conversation wouldn't be there.
Right.
Oftentimes, yes, there is a link. But when we get into just explaining everything away as trauma, it's problematic. You know what I mean? And then you have a whole industry about it. You have this horrible industry, and I actually kind of like a whole industry that produces trauma resolution identities, trauma resolution practitioners. Now we have this whole industry, and you can go to a summit on trauma resolution with the big luminaries and stuff like that, and then you can then you can talk trauma and put it on your website and stuff like that. But it's like in many ways, it's like a religion.
Yeah.
And you just need to get the language and the ideology and stuff like that. And then what you have is like, teenagers and children that are coming up into this era, this industry, this era, this way of explaining suffering. They then can just basically explain their bad behaviors away and just say, well, I'm just being a jerk because I was traumatized by you, parent.
Right.
And then the parent can be like, oh, well, yeah, well, I was just doing that because I was traumatized. And
Right.
so therefore I need to clear my trauma, or it's my fault that you're traumatized. And it just ends up being, in a way, just, well, not all the time, it's just that there's something, debilitating to the soul about just putting everything into the trauma framework. I don't know if can you feel what I'm talking about?
I can, and I think, and I would say that it's not, I would agree with you. And I also think it's not just that, it's like, because, I mean, social media has really been incredible in a lot of ways, but I think in other ways, the language, not everybody, but so many people are just like, I have ADHD, so da 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 da, or I have, it's kind of like it's become trauma or a diagnosis or this label, or I was with a narcissist. Like it's thrown around so casually, and also has become these like integrated identities, and them explaining so much about themselves from this label that they've decided to accept or give themselves, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's really concerning, because there's, at the end of the day, radical responsibility for your own healing or your own behavior or whatever it is, right? And it's almost like a way to offload certain things or to negate certain things. And I don't even think most people know they're doing it. Do you know what I mean?
For sure. These elements can have a lot to do with the evasion of responsibility.
Yeah, and things have really been sensationalized on social media, and it's like people cling on to that. Sometimes I'm just like, you're missing the point, like, of this part of your human experience, like you don't need a label for some of these things, right? Like we don't need a label for this. And this is coming my perspective. I did have a lot of trauma growing up, like very significant trauma. And for a long time, I felt a lot of blame towards my parents. And listen, they help facilitate in this situation. But at the end of the day, I learned that whether it was my fault, it doesn't matter. It's my responsibility to do whatever healing I feel that I need, or make the changes I feel that I need. Like nobody, that's my responsibility. That this is my life, and no matter what I label myself, or how much I say somebody else did something to me, like I have the responsibility to do the work around whatever it is that I'm feeling or what I experienced.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people struggle with that. And the narrative that's happening in the world makes it easier to not have to take that responsibility.
Yeah. And there's so many opportunities to do that. Like I think on some base level, we have this wiring to protect ourselves, wiring to defend ourselves, and some deep, deep level. And that just gets complicated in this thicket of really complex hookups in this advanced brain, this melon that we have. And so I think, psychological defense is sitting on top of the ancient history of body defenses just to survive. And it gets really, really complicated because there's so many opportunities to arm oneself with psychological defenses and defenses and defenses so that it can be very, very challenging to take responsibility. Like, let's just look at a common domestic argument. All of us have them, right? I mean, it's just like it happens, domestic arguments. Right?
Yeah.
And, there's nothing more human than, well, you started it. And then, no, you started it. No,
I always want it to be my husband's fault. You know what I mean? Let's be honest.
And then, like, hello, it's just a common, and to get into these big ideas about how, well, behaviors like that can always already be explained away by some original trauma to our species or something like that, or because of a brain functioning thing. Sure, there's exceptions. There's absolutely exceptions. There's neurodivergent brains that are different than normative brains, and there's different ways of processing and stuff like that. But when a brain has the capacity to do a complex defense, like, oh, I'm saying that, I'm right and you started it because I have that is a complex psychological defense. Let's face it. You started it and I'm being a dick basically because my brain is neurodivergent. No. If you have the complexity to mobilize that degree of a complex defense, then you have the capacity to take responsibility for your part.
Absolutely. Sometimes I think a big piece of that is lacking skills, lacking the information and then lacking the skills to do that. And then, other pieces of it is obviously the deeper healing. But I think I don't think there's enough people out there sharing the message of taking radical responsibility of your part or yourself, right? And so the collective perception can be skewed. It can be skewed, right? Or if you share something like that message, then now you're shaming people. And it's like, no, like there's some, that's just how things are, right? Is we're the ones in charge of our life, regardless.
Yeah, I mean, things get really complicated when we're in relationship with structurally marginalized identities, right? Like on some level, it's like, yeah, there's been a lot of changes since the rise of feminism, but, there's still structural realities and power issues that are there between the genders. And now we have new genders, and then there's racial dynamics and systemic oppression that have effects on how a brain develops because a person has been differentially treated because of their marginalized identities. So there's rural victimization that's happening there.
Yes.
there's real victimization that's happening against, like it's a fact in the literature that neurodivergent people receive more abuse because they're dysregulated a lot of the times. And often they're in marginalized families. And that systemic stress impacts the brain development. And then you have a baby and a neurodivergent brain that's more likely to be dysregulated and break shit around the house and stuff like that. And then because you then have a marginalized brain over there, then that person is more likely to inflict abuse because the child is dysregulated and they're under-resourced by society. And I mean, so it is a mess.
It is a mess, and it's hard to differentiate between what's what a lot of times.
Well, I mean, and then there's just so much hatred.
Yeah.
There's just so much hatred. Then, and then the thing that's also really poisonous in the healing arts and therapy communities is like this, what I call like the trauma hierarchy, where it's like there's a type of social currency in the healing arts as you start to study and have a language for trauma, that then one starts to look into intergenerational trauma and the traumas of the past. And there starts to be this weird social hierarchy about like how much trauma one has and how well one knows trauma and how well one can speak the language.
This is so interesting.
It's not like a social hierarchy. It's a social hierarchy, and it's a victim hierarchy. And the thing about, and this is so clinically, the hardest thing to challenge clinically, I tell students, is somebody that has been victimized, subjugated, okay, and they're running perpetrator energy in the here and now. This is one of the hardest things to work with because subjectively on the inside, they feel like they're a victim. Let's take a couple. I'm working with a couple, and one of the members of the couple feels like a victim in the moment. They feel like it. They feel like they're being hurt. They feel like they're being silenced. They feel like they're not being honored, like they're being thrown under the bus. They feel in every cell of their body that their partner started it.
Yeah.
In many levels, that's just not true sometimes. Sometimes literally they start it. And we could get a panel of 100 people together and, 100 perceptive people, and there'd be like 70, 80, 90% agreement that the one that feels like the victim is running perpetrator energy.
I mean, I've done it. I know I've done it in my marriage from my wounding, right? Like functioning in a way of protection where I started a fight. But I really convinced myself that my spouse did something to me, and all of that.
And that's one of the good things about therapy, right? You can kind of pick things apart and have these awakening moments where you're like, holy shit.
Yeah, like, holy shit, where is this coming from? Or like, I didn't even realize. Yeah.
It's like waking up out of a dream or a trance or something like that. And that's one of the terms for the default mode network is a waking dream.
Ooh, I'm gonna write that down, a waking dream.
Yeah, kind of like our unique individual hallucination machine about what is meaningful in the universe and in our relationships. And what does it do? It just repeats patterns and habits in many ways. We really are deeply habitual mammals.
There have been moments in my life and even more recently where I'm like, oh my gosh, and I can look at from that moment to where I'm like, I created all of that whole time, I perpetuated the whole time. And I'm just like, and I was so blind to it for so long. And it's crazy how powerful we are, right? And how we can be so harmful to ourselves and don't even know it.
Yeah. How we can distort reality.
Yes.
That the default mode network is so powerful as a waking dream that it'll take an objective element, something that, a whole panel of people could say that happened, and it'll just full on distort it.
Yeah.
It'll just full on distort it. And that's really, and this is the consequences on a neurological level of all this stuff, or the driver of all this stuff is really the basic forces of life.
Yeah.
The basic force to survive, the basic force to procreate, the basic force to make meaning. But when what's at stake with all that stuff is life and death. I mean, even our meaning making instinct, that is like our body treats that like a predator prey dynamics. If you challenge my core belief and I have a really rigid core belief, you're actually challenging my life.
Well, I think that's what it feels like for people. I mean, I know in the past that's what it's felt like for me. Like, and what, so do you think that humans were always like this? Or like when you were speaking about the cerebellum, I had a kind of a question like, why has it evolved? Why has it evolved like that, right? And so do you think we were always this way, or we've evolved so much and these things are now feel like life or death, but maybe however long ago they didn't, right? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts because it's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of scientists, archaeologists, anthropologists, neurologists, medical anthropologists, and so on, they have like their favorite pet theory about human brain evolution and language evolution. A lot of it has to do with complex symbolization processes, language.
Yeah.
And so we know that the FOXP2 gene in our brain is shared by songbird species. So my favorite pet theory, and I'll talk about the limitations of it, is that we're wired for a sort of proto-song speech.
Okay.
And that before there was complex symbolization, we spoke mainly in a type of song where it wasn't, it wasn't complex symbolization, but there's still some basic structure to it. Like the tone of my voice is going to indicate to you that this is my territory. But the tone of my voice is going to convey to you that we're in a courting ritual, or that I'm offering a courting ritual. Like, hey, how about and then my tail, or my, I don't know, my tail. We don't really have tails, but sort of, right? The way that I move is communicating that, hey,
Yeah.
courting ritual.
Absolutely. There's like a posture, there's body language, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that is very, very ancient, this kind of song speech, and very, very ancient. We share it with birds, right? So, and what one researcher, this is Marty Serino, talks about is that the cerebellum is a master at sequencing. Okay. As I was mentioning before, sequencing motor movements. And of course, to talk and use symbolic language, we need complex sequencing of our facial muscles and our larynx. And my larynx is a little bit ouchy today, but I like the deep sound of my voice. Somewhere in evolution, the cerebellum had a mutation. And what Serino is saying is that the way that the eyes move, and this is why I like EMDR and I don't like EMDR. I'm trained as a trauma resolution method because it works directly with the eyes. What Serino is saying is that the way that the human eye learned to sequence its environment and what's happening socially and stuff like that, and it essentially, eye takes many, many snapshots per second, not many, about a few saccades, or like little eye twitches. We think sometimes when you look at a bird, you go, oh gosh, those eyes are moving really fast, but that's what human eyes are doing constantly. And then the cerebellum has to put that into a coherent flow, all those little snapshots. When you get like really, really drunk or something like that, or, time slows down when you're in the middle of an accident, the frame rate goes way up. And we take like more snapshots per second.
Well, that's interesting.
Yep. And that's a cerebellum thing, And so what this guy is talking about is that the way that the eyes sequence frames like that and put them in order, connected with the ancient songbird style of expression. And you put those two together, because if you think about it, meaning is very sequential. Like, okay, this is what happened with Christ, and there was the manger, and then there was there was this, and then there was the miracles, and then there was this, and then Buddha, there was this, like he left his home, and then, eventually he went to the Bodhi tree, and then there was this enlightenment, and then this miracle, and then that miracle. It's very sequential.
Yes.
Meaning is very, and then there's, fragments and kind of like rerouting where it's like, okay, Martin Luther did this thing. And if you think about it, it's really sequential. Or in indigenous societies, there was the founding deities and then this thing happened, and then this thing happened. And then so we need to do a ritual practice, which is also very sequential, right? The ritual leader must do this particular thing and then this particular thing. And then the ayahuasca is taken or something like that. And then this thing happens and then this thing. And then there's this song, which has a sequencing and a rhythm to it. So what his theory is that the two kind of married, and then you have a mutation of the cerebellum, and which is like, 80% of the brain surface area, 80% of the brain surface area. And compared to like a macaque monkey, the cerebellum is only about 30% of the surface area of the brain. So we're talking about, like, compared to other great apes and so on, our cerebellum is way more advanced, and it does higher order cognition. What is it doing? Meaning making, sequencing, all that stuff. But like, how did it happen? There's like social grooming theories. There's like figuring out how to sing together. I mean, as a somatic psychologist, and a lot of people know this, that most of language is underneath the content of what we say. It's how, people aren't going to be interested in what I'm saying. I'm saying complex content. And if I didn't have an interesting rhythm, I'm posing that I have an interesting rhythm. Maybe that's arrogant. I don't know. So like, if there's not a song speech underneath this, and they talk about this in attachment psychology too, that a lot of it is about song speech, the crescendos, decrescendos, the pace, the tempo, the rhythm. There's a meter and then that is what's more important. Our nervous systems are dialed into that deeper song speech always.
Interesting.
And then sitting on top of that is this this melon up here that's trying to put everything into sequences. And similar thing with trauma, there's like a compulsion to put everything into sequences. The good part of that is, if you know the neurology, is you can fix the distorted sequences. The bad thing is that everything just gets put into rigid sequencing, dogmatic beliefs and ideologies and social hierarchies, victim hierarchies and perpetrator hierarchies, and all sorts of, patriarchy and drag, I like to say, you know what I mean? Like, it's like things, it's like a compassion hierarchy. That's weird. A humility hierarchy. That's weird.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so complicated, isn't it? It's so complicated.
It's a jungle out there.
It really is. It's wild. It's completely wild. So can you share a little bit more from this perspective? I'm just enjoying learning from you. So how do you work with people? How do you work with couples or individuals? Do you mostly see couples right now?
No, I like to keep things interdisciplinary, which is kind of bucking the trend anyways. The field is all about specialization now. I hate that.
Yeah, I really saw a mix. I mean, I had a group that I'm but I actually saw a mix of people as well.
So I'm doing the specialization just to feed my family, but at my heart, I'm an interdisciplinary researcher and clinician, because I believe in academia, and the same is true for academia as it is for clinical work. In order to do better, to train minds to be integrative, we need to come out of our silos academically and resist specialization. It's really weird, because you think about a doctor that's like thinking only about hearts for 35 years. I think the paradox is like, if I have a heart issue, I'm going to want to find the specialist. I mean, this is what's paradoxical about it. But in order to really get a well-rounded sense of what's happening, even if we take something like embryology, how an embryo is, how our bodies are made, will never be figured out by just an embryologist.
No, it's true. It doesn't leave space for a completely holistic, well-rounded approach to understanding and to the healing process, and it just doesn't.
Yeah. So there's not a one size fits all. That's why I'm glad I've been trained in a lot of different approaches. My first port of call is to connect with the individual. Like, how does this get a sense for how this person understands change process?
Yeah.
Who is this person? How do they move? How do they make meaning? Now, granted, there's going to be a lot of people find me through searching somatics, right? So I'm already, it's like I'm a somatic guy. That means that people that have a trauma framework are going to be searching for somatics because they've run into the literature. They know that I treat the nervous system directly. So even though I resist specialization, I have to do it. So what am I doing with the intake? I'm perceiving, I'm connecting. Am I going to do breath work with everybody? No. Am I going to do kind of voice work and stuff like that with everybody? No. Am I going to touch everybody? No.
Right.
So I have all those tools there, and one of the things that differentiates me as a trauma-informed psychotherapist is that I do touch bodies.
Yeah.
And I believe very strongly in the healing power of touch, because it just works and is very powerful. Is everybody ready for that? No.
Right. Right.
So, and with couples, I love doing couples work. I do. I just love doing couples work. The same thing. It's not a one size fits all. Like I give books, I give literature for couples to read. And is it going to be the same book? No way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is why I love that I resist specialization, because if I were a specialist, I'd just have those go-to books. I still have go-to books, of course. But, it's not going to be like, oh, it's your DBT for couples book, and this is your workbook, and we're just going to do it over. And I can't live like that.
Yeah.
I need variety and diversity, otherwise I'll just get bored.
Well, I think also this is great for people to hear who maybe are not, professionals, right? And they're listening because they're on a journey to figure out what's going to be maybe the best modality for them to try, or really knowing how to find the right practitioner for them. And I think that is one of the biggest hurdles initially for people to work through, is finding somebody they feel connected to, but also that they can co-labor with, and that they feel like they're able to actually make forward progress. And I think that it's hard, like people don't know how to find the right person for them. There's not like a guide or a, something that tells you, ask these questions and here's some red flags and here's some green flags and here's some this, and listen to your intuition. And
Yeah.
like that's not a narrative really in the conventional mental health space. It's very much like we are the ones who know, and we will tell you, and you know what I mean? And I think so you just sharing how you function, how you work, I think is really helpful for a lot of people who will be listening to this. Like, okay, so there are practitioners out there who take this type of approach and all of that. And I've been asking this in all of my interviews, just, do you have a couple of things that you would recommend somebody who's looking for a practitioner that they might start, or maybe something they might ask when they're, on the phone figuring out or doing the intake? Like, do you have any little quick tips on that for people who are searching?
Great question. So we know from it's called the common factors literature.
Okay.
Common factors literature shows empirically that folks, listen to this. Okay. It really isn't the modality that works in therapy. Really isn't. It's the relationship. Okay. Now, granted, part of the relationship is the frameworks. And so I want to say a paradoxical thing. Okay. And the paradoxical thing is, check it out. See what's out there in terms of frameworks and modalities. CBT, and who's that guy? The couples 7 principles guy, Gottman.
Yes,
Gottman.
Gottman.
Gottman. Check out, the Gottman approach and stuff like that, and like kind of tool around a bit and see what you vibe with. That's the thing. It's the vibe. If you like the vibe, cool. But don't get lost in this fantasy. Science has this fantasy that we're just going to find the right evidence-based therapy, because you know what? It's the people that have the most money to be able to fund the research, to be able to then show an empirical element or whatever, to then have their trip be successful. Now, science is cruel, but psychotherapy has to do with a deep encounter with the mystery of meaning making in this experience. Like, it's weird, it's complex. Is it billiard balls in a universe where everything is cause and effect and psychotherapy is just like that? No. We're at peak complexity when it has to do with humans making meaning together.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm saying that, okay, it's the vibe. If you vibe with a modality, cool, but hold it lightly. What's more important is that you give yourself permission, and this is what you and I agree on big time, Andrea, that you give yourself permission to ask difficult questions of therapists that you're interviewing.
Yes, that's so important.
Don't just get into some hallucination that this is the person that's at the top of this hierarchy and they look really well trained in that modality, looks watertight. Give yourself permission to be like, okay, is it really an authority? And what is an authority to me anyways? And what kind of authority do I like and feel good with? And like to ask questions.
That is deeply personal. Authority is actually very deeply personal. And I don't think people understand that.
Deeply personal. Yeah.
Because we think that it's like what is set for us. And there's a piece of that, but really how you accept authority, what you respect, what you find in authority, who you find or allow to be an authority in your life, it's deeply personal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's okay to question things. And I don't think enough people know that.
Yeah. So we'll have busy lives. I know it might be frustrating to hear, shop around until you feel. This is where therapy really is touchy-feely. So like, men tend to be like, okay, it's just like touchy-feely stuff, not, therapy, like I want something that's going to help me to become more effective in life. And it's like, guys, no, emotional literacy, it will help you become more effective, It's just gonna happen. It might take a little time, but hey, this touchy-feely stuff about like how you feel when you're with a therapist, it matters. Give yourself permission to shop around. I'm really aware that we're all really, really busy, but like really shop around until it feels good, like it feels like a click.
Absolutely. And I would add, don't worry about the person's response. Like the person's response when you ask questions gives you all the information that you need. And I'm speaking from experience of asking questions when I've been in doctor's offices, asking for somebody to elaborate and how that was received or how I felt after I asked the question. You're right, to a person of authority. That can be an experience that either can really encourage you and empower you, or it can be an experience that makes you feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that again.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just want to encourage you that if you have that experience like that, where you question, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that again, that was unpleasant, or I felt dumb, or I felt this, or whatever it is, right? I encourage you to do it again. I encourage you to do it again, because you're worthy of that, and not everybody will respond that way, and you have to find the people who don't respond that way, right? For yourself.
Yeah. And we need to do our best to make room for failure, no matter how well you're informed or you take Andrea and my advice, that we still get in these hallucinations and trances, and we need to reenact something from the past. So just to put that as a disclaimer, we will reenact stuff. And to make room for that, you know what I mean? Like, because our psyche sometimes, like we were saying before, what it'll do is it'll just create a new addition to an old conflict. And that's what it needs to do. So like the disclaimer of all this is, just make some room for yourself to like go in and have like a kind of horrible feeling situation with your therapist. And this is the other side of it too. No matter how great that therapist is or what modality they have, if your psyche and your body needs to have a new addition to an old conflict, which is often the case, it will, no matter what. It's kind of ominous, right? But it's true.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Can we talk about, so I do want to ask you about energy and somatics just a little bit more, because I think that there's a lot of people, they think they know what that means, and also the difference between working maybe directly with the brain versus the tissue. Would you be willing to share a little bit about that? I think just for people's education to understand some of these differences.
Yeah. Well, I'll give some examples just to start from the ground, and then we can work up a little bit from there. So the insula is a region in the brain, in the core of the brain. And when I direct your attention to, like, for example, what you're feeling in your abdomen right now, the sensory readout, like we're under pressure because the camera's going, and, we got to do our best and all that stuff.
I need to focus on what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. And then, so when I direct your attention to what's happening as a sensory experience in your abdomen, and my little girl, speaking about abdomen, my 5-year-old is knocking on the door right now saying, I need to go to school, Papa. And so just one second. And what's happening in my abdomen is a lot at the moment. It's perfect. And
No worries.
so just one moment. Oh, wait. Okay, good. She's taking a break. So that's a perfect example. A lot happening in the belly, the pressures of life, and then the sensory readout goes up as a bottom-up flow of information to the insula area of the brain. It's a core. And then that gets channeled into hubs of association, other moments of pressure and stuff like that. And see, the thing is that, this is brain and it's also tissue.
Yes.
Okay, so the insula is reading out what's in our connective tissue. Like if there's gentle touch, that's very slow. Like our ancient grooming elements grooming is not fast, is slow. And there's very specific readouts in our tissue for that slow paced register that feels good. And it's all about building a bond.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that goes into the insula and there's a whole map of experiences of having that, And so if it's a good, safe feeling touch, we're going to be able to be self-soothed and stuff. But when it comes to energy, the whole body is bioenergetic. This isn't wooji. It's like, that's the fact of our bodies is that we are bioenergetic beings. Mitochondria are cranking out energy, ATP and all that stuff. So, energy talk and chakras and all that stuff. It's interesting. It becomes inflated and grandiose. And you have like this social hierarchy thing again, where at the top you have the great transmitter of auric knowledge, who can like see, and then the human wants that. The human, obviously we want saints and luminaries who can like see something that we can't see, so that if we're around them enough, then we can see it, and then we can be up there. But it's like, hey, listen, part of the big picture will forever be a mystery. My greatest contender now for quantum theory of biology is calcium ions, and I talk about that in my book. I think that it really is the best contender because it has a lot to do with cancer, long-range cellular communication, and it's in terms of speeds and everything, it really is the best contender for quantum computation. So I'm very interested in the question of energy, and not the energy that is, I'm just going to take the traditions and just like explain everything away through the traditions. I honor the traditions, but I'm also deeply immersed in the science and in the question, like the mystery of it all. So
yeah, I love that. So for a practical, just for people listening who maybe are newer to this concept and are exploring again, like maybe where they want to start with their journey, what's the different, like deep tissue, you said it before, you were doing deep tissue work for trauma. Why would you do you know what I mean? Like why?
Yeah.
Why would you even need to do that?
Yeah, it's hard to self-perceive around this stuff. Because the thing is that trauma over time is going to impact your posture.
Yes.
And it's hard to kind of like look at your own posture and be like, oh, that's because of my trauma. You know what I mean? But like, it's kind of weird. You'd want to ask the people that you love, you know what I mean? Like, hey, my body, can you just have a look at my body? Where am I stuck? Where are my patterns? A lot of them are in the face.
Oh yeah, I have my face is shaped a certain way from being in birth trauma. Like it's in my eyes, the way that they're not level. It's like a physical manifestation of some things. Absolutely.
Okay, here's a good diagnostic. Check this out. Put on some music that you like. Make sure that your phone is turned off and there's going to be no intrusions, and just free associate with your body and move and breathe. Okay. But you're asking yourself the question as you give yourself the permission to free associate with your body and move and breathe. Where do I feel stuck?
That's really, I'm going to do that.
Where do I feel stuck? And then, so
Yeah.
that is the question that you'd bring to a somatic psychologist or the information that you'd bring to a somatic psychologist is like, I did this exercise and I just felt like I couldn't bring breath to this area, or I couldn't move like this, or I just felt stuck in my mind about just like all these trips and narratives about how I'm not a dancer and I need 12 beers first, or, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So the deep tissue work that you have experience with, it sounds like it's like kind of unwinding the physical manifestations.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And then often, of course, what's repressed in the body is the emotions.
Oh, yeah.
So, and one of the most common areas besides the face to facilitate that repression is the diaphragm and the pelvis, right? Because a lot of sexual injury happens and sexual abuse. So the pelvis shuts down, and that has whole body consequences.
Yes. Well, and it's all connected. This has been an incredible conversation. So you referred to your book a couple of times, and we're going to have all of your links in the show notes. I would love for you just to give us maybe just like a brief overview of your book so people can go. And is it out yet?
No, I submitted it December 1st. It'll be in editing for a bit, and I'd say early next year.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So the book is for practitioners, but for anybody interested in the complexities that we've been touching into, philosophical elements, a kind of trauma resolution map that gives you the latest of the neuroscience in terms of how to bring it into practice. So there's a practical element. And then a lot of it is complex philosophy. So it's not the type of book that you just like how to 5 steps to like become a better whatever. That stuff is there, but
Yeah.
I wanted it to be philosophical and deep, and to carry people into a journey about like, what is it to be living in this war of opinions and identities that we find ourselves in, and how do we understand and how do we make manifest what I call the glorious body? How do we be an agent of light, and not just light, but to be able to dance and have fluidity in the darkness? How to be able to take responsibility for the places that, I call it toxic innocence, where we're claiming innocence and claiming purity, and we're not. The people in our life don't see it, don't feel it,
Yeah.
and to have a deep, deep encounter with the shadow of ourselves, with culture and so on. So, and there's a lot of science in it. There's a lot about energy there, but again, the hardcore energy stuff. I speak a lot about embryology, and why embryology. It's because how our bodies are built. If we don't know, so listen, it's like the complexity of what's happening when life builds itself is astounding. When we think AI is like really advanced, oh my God, people like how an organism is created, natural intelligence at that level is way beyond what AI can do, way beyond. When a cell can be 3D printed by AI, living cell, then we have something to talk about, but we're a long ways away from that. Okay, I need to end there.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's great to talk with you.
You too.